Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of C# Programming Basics. In today's episode we'll talk about value types and reference types variables. What are they, what's the difference between them, how they're stored in the memory, and run a simple example to demonstrate that. Let's start. The C# language is a strongly typed language. So that means all the variables that we need to use, we have to declare it in order to use it in our app or game. There are two main types, the value type and reference type variables, and they differ by how we store them in the memory. The first type is the value type variables, and those variables, they store their data in their own memory space. And when passing the value from one method to another, it creates another copy of that value which can be modified, but if we modify the value in one of the methods, it's not going to affect the other method. Which means if we pass a value x and then in the next method we change that x into y, we will have two copies, one x and one y. They won't be connected. The most common value types variables are Boolean, integer, floats, structs, and bytes. And we'll go in a bit of details in some of those variables. One of the most common usage of the value types is integer numerics. And there's a different types of integer numerics, and what it does, it stores an absolute number. And the different types, they differ between the bit size and the support of the negative and positive numbers, which is signed and unsigned. And then we have the floating point numerics, and those hold real numbers with decimals next to them. There's a different types of those numerics, and they differ between the size and the precision. Bool type. The bool type is a type that holds a Boolean value inside, which means it can hold two values, either false or true. And it's used in a lot of logical cases where you want to decide between two choices. There's a special condition where the Boolean value can include three values if it's a null value. So it can be true, false, or null. Char, which is a shortcut of character, it's a type that holds one element of a character. Struct types is quite similar to the class types, and it's something that we will encounter while developing games. And then we will see that in Unity there's a lot of struct types built in, such as color, Victor2, Victor3, and then those things we will have more interaction with them along when we develop our games or apps. We will have a more deep dive into the struct types in the other video. I'll put a link in the description below for you if you want to check out more details about the value type variables, and that's the official page of the .NET website. So the second one is reference types variables, and this one, it mainly differs about the place where we store the data. So the reference type, it does not store the data in its own memory space. It stores the data in a different memory space, and itself it holds an address to that memory space. For example, let's say we have a value of x. The variable itself, the reference type variable, the value x data is stored in a different memory, but the variable stores a pointer that points to the address of that value. And when passing a reference type from one method to another and then changing it in the next method, it will reflect on the first one. Because we don't pass the value, we pass the address or the pointer to that address that saves the value. So if we change it in the next method, the first one will also get reflected on. There's different types of reference type variables, such as class, interface, delegate, string, object, dynamic, record, and others. String types is something that relates to the character but in a sequence. So character can hold one letter, whereas string can hold from 0 up into a sequence of letters. So it can basically be a word, a sentence, and even bigger. Though it's considered as a reference type, it can sometimes act as a value due to its immutability, but that's something that can be discussed later on if needed. Class type is something that's going to be widely used in game development or app development. What it does, it's basically a blueprint that can hold a lot of variables. Through it, we can define different things, and it will act as an object. For example, let's say we want to define a person. So the person will be the class, and inside of it we'll have his name, his age, his blood type, and etc. Class types will act as a reference. If we pass it in from a method to another and then change it later on, it will reflect into the original one. Similarly, I want to put the link of the reference types of the .NET page down below in the description if you want to check out more. So we finished talking about these things. Let's have some tests, right? So we will have two simple examples of testing out the passing of the values of the value type variables versus the reference type variables. So in the project here, I have built two scripts, reference type tests and the value type test. And I've added them into an object in our scene, and then we'll have one toggled on for the testing. So let's go ahead and start the value type. As you can see, what I've done here, something simple. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to describe what I'm doing, but then if you get confused about what is a private start, what is public class, this is something that's going to be discussed later on. This is really just to explain the whole theory about passing values in both types. What I'm going to do is going to explain what we have here. So we have two variables in type integer and character, which is a value type, and we're using the method start, which is it's a mono-behavior method that runs at the start of the scene. And what it does, it's similar to the main method in the C#, but what we'll do here is we will assign the value 4 to the integer and then the value of a to the character. And then we want to test if we pass it on to a different method and change the value, does it retain the value of the original one or does it actually change it? In theory, it should not change it. They should have two separate values. So we set up the values here. I'm going to print out those values as a way for us to see what is the initial value. And then later on, I'm going to call the method modify values, which is written in here. It's also a private method, and it takes two values, which are the initial one that I have created. And then inside here, what I do is I'm modifying both values randomly. So I'm just multiplying the integer and then changing the character to become z. And afterwards, I'm printing those new values in here. And right after I do this, I reprint the original values just to see if they get changed or not. So if we go back to Unity, and then I make sure that I have value type enabled, and then I'm gonna expand this so we can see the print statements down below. So as you can see, let me stop it, we have the integer as 4 and the character as an a. We changed it by multiplying by 2, it became 8, and then here on became z. And then we reprinted the original ones again, which shows that they are still 4 and a, which means value types don't get changed if they pass to a different method or passed into a different place. So that proves the whole idea of value types. The second example is going to be about the reference type tests. So I've also created a method in here which seems slightly more simple because we're using classes, and classes, as I said, is a blueprint that holds variables. So what I've done here, I've also used the same method start to call whatever logic we want, but at the top I created a new class called a test class, and inside of it I put a variable called character. And as you can see, character is considered as a value type, but since it's encapsulated inside of a reference type, it will act as a reference type as a general. So what we did in here, I created an instance of this class, called it class A, and gave it the character A, and then I made a new class called the class Z, which is referenced from the same class A, and then I changed the class Z variable into Z. So to summarize this, we have two instances, class A and class Z. Class A has been initialized and has A, where class Z is created from class A as a reference, and then we change this value to Z. So as we've seen before, reference types, if we pass the reference and change it, it will affect the original one. What I'm doing here is I'm debugging the values here. So I'm saying the class A and then its value of the character, and then class Z and its value. If everything as is correct is in the theory, when we change the value of the class Z, it should affect the class A. So let's see how this works. Right, as you can see, after we change the values, we printed out the class A and the class Z, and then we see that the class A value has also changed, even though we haven't changed it directly, but it is a reference in the class Z. So this is also proves that reference types even if inside of them we have value types, it's encapsulated into the whole reference, so it changes the whole thing as a reference. So that's it. Those are the two types that we're going to encounter while building our game in Unity: value types and reference types. If you have any more questions, please hit the comments below. Let me know if you have anything, or hit the Discords. Apart from this, I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have more sessions in the future, and if you did, hit the like and subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one. Bye bye.